The transport ship Harmony's Edge shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its massive hull groaning under the stress of deceleration. Staff Sergeant Marcus Tank Rodriguez pressed his face against the small porthole, watching as the alien station came into view. The structure was enormous, easily the size of Manhattan, with spiraling towers that seemed to twist through space like frozen tornadoes. This was Nexus Station, humanity's first real diplomatic outpost in the Galactic Coalition. Marcus had been selected for this mission not because of his diplomatic skills, but because of his complete lack of them. The brass wanted someone who wouldn't be intimidated by the alien species they'd be working alongside. Someone who could stand his ground if things went south. At 6'4" and built like a walking tank, Marcus fit the bill perfectly. The docking procedure took nearly an hour. When the airlock finally cycled open, Marcus stepped into an environment unlike anything he'd ever experienced. The station's artificial gravity felt slightly lighter than Earth's, and the air carried strange scents that his nose couldn't quite identify. The corridor stretched ahead of him, its walls made of some kind of translucent material that pulsed with soft blue light. "Sergeant Rodriguez?" a voice called out in perfect English. Marcus turned to see a figure approaching that made his jaw drop. The being stood nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms and skin that shifted colors like oil on water. Its head was elongated with large black eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. This was his first real alien encounter. "I am Ambassador Thexhai of the Zenthari Collective," the being said, extending one of its 4 hands. "We have been most eager to work alongside humanity's military representatives." Marcus shook the offered hand, noting the surprising warmth and firmness of the grip. "Pleasure to meet you, sir. I'm here to observe joint training exercises and report back to Earth Command." The next few hours were a whirlwind of introductions. Marcus met representatives from a dozen different species, each more incredible than the last. There were the crystalline Vorthan, who communicated through harmonic vibrations, the plant-like Silathi, whose bodies seemed to sway even in the station's still air, the mechanical Nexari, whose bodies were a fusion of organic and synthetic components that defied explanation. But it was the Krathari that caught Marcus's attention. They were the Coalition's elite soldiers, standing 7 feet tall with muscular frames covered in what looked like natural armor plating. Their faces were fierce, with prominent ridges above glowing amber eyes and mouths full of sharp teeth. They carried themselves with the confidence of apex predators. The Krathari have been the Coalition's primary military force for over 3,000 years. Ambassador Thexhai explained as they walked through the station's training facilities. They are incredibly strong, naturally armored, and their reflexes are enhanced beyond most organic limitations. They have never lost a war. Marcus nodded, studying the Krathari soldiers as they moved through combat drills. Their movements were precise, deadly, and utterly confident. He could see why they dominated Coalition military doctrine, but there was something in their bearing that rubbed him the wrong way. They looked at the other species like they were children playing at war. The tour ended at the main training amphitheater, where dozens of Coalition species were engaged in various exercises. Combat simulations, tactical planning, weapons training. It was like a cosmic boot camp. Marcus watched with professional interest, noting techniques and equipment that might be useful for Earth's forces. "Your species intrigues us greatly," came a deep, rumbling voice behind him. Marcus turned to find himself face to face with the largest Krathari he'd seen yet. The alien's armor plating gleamed under the amphitheater's lights, and his amber eyes held an unmistakable challenge. "I am War Leader Krikstal," the Krathari continued. "I have studied your species' military history. You fight constantly among yourselves, yet your technology is primitive. Your tactics are quaint." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He'd dealt with arrogant officers before, but this was different. This wasn't just military posturing, it felt personal, like the alien was dismissing not just him but all of humanity. "We get by," Marcus replied evenly, keeping his voice neutral. He'd been briefed on the importance of maintaining diplomatic relations, but he wasn't going to back down from a challenge either. Krikstal's mouth curved in what might have been a smile, revealing those sharp teeth. "Yes, I imagine you do, against other humans. But how would you fare against a real warrior?" The amphitheater had grown quiet. Marcus could feel dozens of alien eyes on him, watching to see how the human would respond. This felt like a moment that could define how his species was perceived in the Coalition. "I suppose that would depend on the warrior," Marcus said, meeting the Krithari's gaze steadily. Crixtal laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Spoken like a true primitive. Very well, human. Perhaps you would honor me with a demonstration? Nothing serious, just a simple sparring match. I promise to be gentle. Marcus looked around the amphitheater. Every species was watching now, including Ambassador Thexhi, whose color-shifting skin had taken on darker hues that Marcus suspected indicated concern. This wasn't what he'd been sent here for, but backing down now would send a message about human courage that he couldn't accept. What kind of demonstration? Marcus asked. Hand-to-hand combat. No weapons, no armor. Just natural ability against natural ability. Crixtal gestured toward a circular platform in the center of the amphitheater. Unless, of course, you feel your species is not ready for such a test? Marcus looked at the platform, then back at the 8-foot-tall alien warrior. Crixtal probably outweighed him by 100 pounds. Had natural armor, enhanced reflexes, and 3,000 years of military tradition backing him up. It was going to be the most lopsided fight in the history of bad decisions. Sure, Marcus said, beginning to remove his jacket. Why not? As he walked toward the platform, Marcus could hear whispered conversations in dozens of alien languages. He caught fragments of translation from his comm unit, words like foolish, primitive, and doomed. Ambassador Thexhi appeared beside him as he reached the platform's edge. Sergeant Rodriguez, this is not necessary. War Leader Crixtal is formidable. There is no shame in declining such a challenge. Marcus appreciated the ambassador's concern, but he'd made his choice. I've got this, sir. Sometimes you've got to show them what humans are made of. As he stepped onto the platform, Marcus felt the familiar calm that came before a fight. His drill instructors had always said he was too stubborn to know when he was beaten. Today he figured that might just be enough. The platform hummed with energy as ancient Krithari combat protocols engaged. A shimmering barrier rose around the circular arena, designed to contain the violence that was about to unfold. Marcus rolled his shoulders, trying to work out the tension that had been building since he'd agreed to this insane idea. Crixtal stepped onto the platform with the fluid grace of a predator. His armor plating caught the light, and Marcus could see that what he'd initially thought was natural armor was actually a complex biological system. The plates shifted slightly as the Krithari moved, adjusting and overlapping to provide maximum protection while maintaining flexibility. The rules are simple, Crixtal announced, his voice carrying easily across the now silent amphitheater. Combat continues until one participant yields or is rendered incapable of continuing. Medical teams stand ready, though I suspect they will only be needed for one of us. Marcus ignored the jab and focused on what he was seeing. Crixtal moved like a fighter, but there was something almost ceremonial about his stance. The alien held himself with the rigid formality of someone who had learned combat as an art form, rather than a desperate struggle for survival. Ready when you are, big guy, Marcus said, settling into a loose boxer's stance. He'd fought in underground rings during his younger days. Back when he'd been angry at the world and looking for ways to channel that rage, the muscle memory was still there waiting to be called upon. Crixtal's amber eyes narrowed. Such confidence. Very well. Let us see what 3,000 years of Krithari military superiority can teach you about. Marcus didn't let him finish. The moment the Krithari began his speech, Marcus moved. He'd learned long ago that aliens seemed to love their dramatic pronouncements, but in a real fight, talking got you killed. The punch came fast and hard, aimed directly at Crixtal's solar plexus. It should have been a fight-ending blow, but Marcus's fist connected with armor plating that felt like hitting a brick wall. The impact sent shockwaves up his arm, and he had to fight not to grimace at the pain. Crixtal looked down at the spot where Marcus had struck him, then back at the human with what might have been amusement. How quaint. Was that supposed to... This time it was Crixtal who didn't get to finish his sentence. Marcus had expected the armor, had planned for it. While the alien was looking down, Marcus grabbed the edge of one of the overlapping plates and yanked hard, using his entire body weight to throw the much larger being off balance. Crixtal stumbled, his carefully maintained stance disrupted. It was only for a fraction of a second, but Marcus had been trained to exploit every opening. He drove his knee upward, aiming for the gap where the Krithari's armor plates met at the hip joint. The blow connected, and for the first time, Crixtal showed signs of pain. The alien warrior's eyes widened in surprise as he staggered backward. his breathing momentarily disrupted. "Impossible," someone whispered from the crowd. Marcus caught fragments of translation indicating shock, disbelief, and in some cases what sounded like approval. Krikstal straightened, his amber eyes now burning with something that looked like genuine anger. "You dare," he began. But Marcus was already moving again. Street fighting had taught Marcus that momentum was everything. You hit hard, you hit fast, and you never gave your opponent time to recover. He feinted left, then drove his right elbow toward the same joint he'd just struck. This time, Krikstal was ready. The alien's enhanced reflexes kicked in, and he caught Marcus's arm in a grip that felt like a steel vise. With casual ease, he lifted the human off the ground and threw him across the platform. Marcus hit the barrier hard enough to see stars, but his training kicked in before conscious thought could register the pain. He rolled with the impact, using the barrier's energy field to help redirect his momentum. Instead of crashing to the ground, he bounced off at an angle that put him behind Krikstal's position. The Krathari was already turning, but Marcus had bought himself precious seconds. He launched himself at the alien's back, wrapping his arms around Krikstal's neck in a chokehold that would have dropped a human in seconds. Krikstal's neck was too thick, his windpipe too well protected by muscle and armor, but Marcus wasn't trying to choke him out. He was trying to limit the alien's vision and mobility, while he figured out his next move. "Get off me, primitive," Krikstal snarled, reaching back with all four arms to dislodge his unexpected passenger. Marcus held on for dear life, using every dirty trick he'd learned in back-alley brawls. He bit down on one of the alien's reaching hands, drawing a surprised yelp. He drove his knee repeatedly into the small of Krikstal's back, looking for any weakness in that natural armor. For a moment, it almost seemed like the tactic might work. Krikstal was struggling to reach him, his longer arms actually working against him in the close-quarters grapple. The alien stumbled off balance and increasingly frustrated. Then Krikstal did something that changed everything. Instead of continuing to reach for Marcus, he simply fell backward. Marcus had perhaps half a second to realize what was happening before 8 feet, and nearly 300 pounds of alien warrior came crashing down on top of him. The impact drove all the air from his lungs and sent lightning bolts of pain through his ribs. He managed to roll out from under Krikstal's bulk, but the damage was done. Every breath felt like swallowing broken glass, and he was pretty sure at least 2 of his ribs were cracked. Marcus struggled to his feet, using the barrier for support. Krikstal rose with fluid grace, not even slightly winded by the exchange. "An interesting technique," he admitted. "Crude but effective against an unprepared opponent. Unfortunately for you, I am no longer unprepared." The alien's stance had changed. Gone was the ceremonial formality, replaced by something more practical and infinitely more dangerous. Krikstal began to circle Marcus like a shark sensing blood in the water. "I confess I underestimated your species' capacity for violence." Krikstal continued conversationally. "Most civilized races fight with honor, following established protocols. You fight like an animal. It is both repugnant and educational." Marcus wiped blood from his mouth, trying to buy time while he assessed his situation. His ribs were definitely cracked, his right shoulder felt like it might be separated, and he was facing an opponent who outclassed him in every measurable way. The smart thing to do would be to yield. To admit defeat and hope that humanity's reputation could recover from this demonstration of their physical limitations. It would be the diplomatic thing to do. Marcus had never been accused of being either smart or diplomatic. "You talk too much," he wheezed, pushing off from the barrier. "In my neighborhood, we call that fear." Krikstal's eyes flashed dangerously. "Fear? You think I fear you, little human? I think you're trying real hard to convince yourself you're still in control," Marcus replied, settling back into his fighting stance despite the pain. "Thing is, I've been in plenty of fights where I was outmatched. Sometimes the smaller guy wins anyway. And how exactly do you propose to accomplish that miracle?" Krikstal asked, genuinely curious. Marcus managed a bloody grin. "Easy, I just have to want it more than you do." Krikstal's laugh echoed through the amphitheater, but there was less amusement in it now and more genuine anger. "Want it more? Child, I have crushed rebellions that lasted decades. I have personally eliminated threats to coalition security that your primitive mind cannot even comprehend. Your want means nothing against 3 millennia of superiority." Marcus said nothing, conserving his breath and energy. He could feel something warm trickling down his side, probably blood from where his cracked ribs had shifted during that crushing fall. But pain was something he understood. something he could work with. Pain meant he was still in the fight. The Krathari warrior began his approach, moving with the measured confidence of someone who knew the outcome was inevitable. His forearms moved in a complex pattern, clearly a fighting form that had been perfected over generations. Each step was calculated, each movement designed to funnel Marcus toward a position where escape would be impossible. Marcus watched the approach with the eye of someone who had spent years studying violence. Crixtal was good, better than good. His technique was flawless, his timing perfect. He fought like someone who had never lost, never been surprised, never been forced to adapt to an opponent who refused to follow the rules. That was going to be his weakness. Instead of backing away from the approaching alien, Marcus suddenly lunged forward, diving low toward Crixtal's legs. It was a desperate move, the kind of tackle that had gotten him thrown out of more than one bar. But desperation was something humans understood better than most species. Crixtal saw the attack coming and prepared to simply step aside, but Marcus had anticipated that. At the last second, he changed direction, rolling sideways and sweeping his leg out in a move he'd learned from a Filipino Marine who specialized in dirty fighting. The sweep caught Crixtal's ankle at exactly the wrong moment, just as the alien was shifting his weight. For something weighing nearly 300 pounds, Crixtal went down hard, his natural grace unable to compensate for physics. Marcus didn't waste time congratulating himself. He threw his entire body weight onto the fallen alien, driving his elbow toward the gap where Crixtal's neck met his shoulder. If he could find the right pressure point, he might be able to slow the alien down long enough to... Crixtal's response was swift and brutal. Two of his arms grabbed Marcus and lifted him bodily into the air, while a third drove a devastating punch into his already damaged ribs. The world exploded into white-hot agony. Marcus felt something give way inside his chest, heard the distinct crack of bone breaking. He hit the platform hard enough to bounce, gasping like a fish out of water as his body tried to remember how to breathe around the pain. Enough, Crixtal roared, rising to his full height. I grow tired of these games. You have shown courage, human, but courage without strength is merely foolishness. Through the haze of pain, Marcus could see the alien approaching for what was clearly intended to be the finishing blow. Around the amphitheater, he caught glimpses of alien faces, some showing pity, others displaying what looked like respect for his refusal to surrender, but all clearly expecting this to end badly for the human. That was when Marcus heard something that changed everything. Come on, Marine. Show them what Earth is made of. The voice came from the crowd, but it wasn't alien. It was human, speaking in accented English that Marcus recognized as one of the technical specialists who had arrived on an earlier transport. The man wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to risk diplomatic incidents by cheering for violence, but he was doing it anyway. And suddenly, Marcus wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for every human who had ever been told they weren't strong enough, fast enough, or good enough. He was fighting for his drill sergeants who had taught him that Marines don't quit. He was fighting for his little sister who had cried when he shipped out, afraid she'd never see her big brother again. Most importantly, he was fighting for the idea that sometimes the impossible just needed someone stupid enough to try. Marcus forced himself to his feet, each movement sending fresh waves of agony through his shattered ribs. Blood was definitely flowing now, and his vision kept trying to blur at the edges, but he was still standing. You want to see what humans are made of? Marcus wheezed, raising his fists again. We're made of the kind of stubborn that doesn't know when to quit. Crixtal paused, his amber eyes showing something that might have been respect. You cannot possibly continue. Your ribs are broken, you are bleeding internally, and you can barely stand. Yield now and preserve what honor you have earned. Honor? Marcus laughed, tasting blood. I've got a different definition of honor than you do, big guy. Where I come from, honor means you keep fighting until you can't fight anymore. And I can still fight. To prove his point, Marcus took a step forward, then another. Each movement was torture, but he kept moving anyway. Around the amphitheater, the crowd had gone completely silent. Even the technical specialist who had shouted encouragement was now watching in hushed amazement. Crixtal shook his massive head in what looked like disbelief. This is madness. You cannot possibly hope to. You keep saying what I can't do, Marcus interrupted, his voice gaining strength despite his injuries. But I'm still here. I'm still fighting. And unless you put me down permanently, I'm going to keep coming at you. For the first time since the fight began, Uncertainty flickered across the Crithari warrior's features. This wasn't how these things were supposed to go. The inferior species was supposed to recognize its limitations and submit to the superior force. They weren't supposed to keep getting up when any rational being would have yielded long ago. "This is not how warriors fight," Crixtal said, and there was something almost pleading in his voice. Marcus managed another bloody grin. "No," he agreed. "This is how humans fight." The statement hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond this single combat. Around the amphitheater, representatives from dozens of species were witnessing something they had never seen before. A member of a primitive species refusing to acknowledge defeat even when faced with overwhelming superiority. Tal raised his forearms, preparing to deliver a blow that would finally end this madness. His amber eyes held no mercy now, only the grim determination of a warrior who had been forced to take this contest further than he had ever intended. Marcus stood his ground, swaying slightly but still defiant, still ready to fight. He had no plan, no clever strategy that would turn the tide. All he had was the absolute refusal to give up that had been drilled into him by years of military training and a lifetime of being told he wasn't good enough. Sometimes it turned out that was enough. The amphitheater held its breath as Crixtal's forearms came down in a coordinated strike that would have shattered stone. But at the last possible second, something extraordinary happened. The Crithari warrior pulled his punches. Not completely. The blows still connected with enough force to drive Marcus to his knees and send fresh waves of agony through his broken ribs. But they weren't the killing strikes they should have been. Instead of finishing the fight, Crixtal had held back just enough to keep the stubborn human breathing. Marcus looked up from where he knelt, blood streaming down his face, and saw something in the alien's amber eyes that he hadn't expected to see. Confusion, doubt, and underneath it all, something that might have been the beginning of respect. "Why?" Crixtal asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you continue? Any rational being would have yielded by now. You gain nothing by prolonging this suffering." Marcus spat blood onto the platform, using the moment to gather what little strength he had left. Around them, the alien observers were leaning forward, straining to hear his answer. This had become more than entertainment now. It had become something unprecedented in Coalition history. "Because," Marcus wheezed, forcing himself back to his feet through sheer willpower, "giving up isn't in my programming." The simple statement hit the amphitheater like a physical force. Several of the observing aliens began rapid conversations in their native languages, and Marcus's translation device struggled to keep up with the overlapping discussions. He caught fragments, words like impossible, unprecedented, and disturbing. Ambassador Thexhi's skin had shifted to colors that Marcus had learned indicated extreme agitation. The Xanthari diplomat was clearly calculating the political implications of what was happening here, and apparently not liking his conclusions. But it was the Crithari soldiers in the crowd that showed the most dramatic reaction. These were warriors who had built their entire civilization around the concept of natural superiority, and they were watching one of their elite fighters struggle against what should have been an easily defeated primitive. Some looked angry, but others were watching Marcus with expressions that suggested they were seeing something they had never encountered before. Crixtal stepped closer, his massive frame casting a shadow over the kneeling human. "Your programming," he repeated slowly. "Yes, I begin to understand. You are not fighting me anymore, are you? You are fighting something inside yourself." Marcus managed a weak nod. "Every drill instructor who ever told me I wasn't tough enough. Every officer who said I'd never amount to anything. Every bully who thought they could keep me down." He looked directly into Crixtal's amber eyes. "I spent my whole life being told I wasn't good enough. Today isn't the day I start believing them." For a long moment, the two warriors stared at each other in silence. Then Crixtal did something that sent shockwaves through the assembled coalition representatives. He extended one of his 4 hands toward the injured human. "Rise," he said formally. "You have earned the right to face me as an equal." Marcus stared at the offered hand for several heartbeats, then reached out and grasped it. Crixtal pulled him to his feet with surprising gentleness, supporting him until he could stand on his own. "This changes nothing," the Crithari warrior said, but his voice lacked the arrogant confidence it had carried before. "I am still superior in strength, speed, and training. Your defiance is admirable but ultimately meaningless." "Maybe," Marcus agreed. settling back into his fighting stance despite the protest from his broken ribs. But meaningless or not, it's mine, and I'm not done with it yet. Crystal studied him for another moment, then resumed his own combat posture. But something fundamental had changed in the alien's bearing. The casual dismissiveness was gone, replaced by the focused attention that a professional warrior reserved for a legitimate threat. "Very well," Crystal said. "Let us finish this properly." This time when they came together, it was different. Crystal was no longer fighting to prove a point about Crithari superiority. He was fighting to test something he had never encountered before. His strikes were still powerful enough to shatter bones, but they were measured now, almost scientific in their precision. Marcus, for his part, had stopped trying to win in any conventional sense. His body was too damaged, his strength too depleted for victory to be possible. Instead, he focused on something else entirely, lasting. Every second he remained conscious was a victory against impossible odds. Every punch he managed to land was a statement that humans refused to be dismissed. The fight became something strange and terrible and beautiful. Two warriors from completely different worlds, testing the limits of what was possible. Crystal's superior strength and armor against Marcus's absolute refusal to surrender. Technique and tradition against pure, stubborn will. Marcus took punishment that should have killed him. Blows that would have caved in a normal human skull left him staggered but still standing. Each time he went down, he found some reserve of strength he didn't know he possessed and climbed back to his feet. And with each moment he continued to fight, something changed in the watching crowd. The initial bloodthirsty excitement had long since faded, replaced by something approaching awe. Even the Crithari soldiers were no longer cheering for their champion, they were simply watching in stunned silence as their fundamental understanding of the universe was challenged by one bleeding human who didn't know when to quit. "Impossible," someone whispered from the crowd. Marcus thought it might have been one of the crystalline Vorthan. How is he still conscious? How is he still fighting? The question echoed through the amphitheater in a dozen different languages, translated by 100 different devices into concepts that every species could understand. It was a question that went to the heart of what they were witnessing. Not just a fight between two individuals, but a collision between completely different philosophies of existence. Crystal landed another devastating combination that should have ended the contest permanently. Marcus staggered, swayed, and somehow remained upright. The Crithari warrior stepped back, his breathing heavy for the first time since the fight began. "Why won't you fall?" he demanded, and there was genuine anguish in his voice now. "I have broken your ribs, damaged your internal organs, and you can barely see through the blood in your eyes. What force keeps you standing?" Marcus wiped the blood from his face and looked around the amphitheater at the dozens of alien species watching them. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the silence. "The same force that got humans off their little planet and out into the galaxy," he said. "The same force that made us reach for the stars even when everyone said we'd never make it. We're not the strongest species or the smartest or the fastest." He raised his fists again, his movements slow but determined. "But we're too damn stubborn to know when we're beaten." The words seemed to hang in the air like a challenge to everything the coalition had believed about the natural order of the universe. Around the amphitheater, Marcus could see representatives from dozens of species processing what they had just witnessed. Some looked disturbed, others intrigued, but all appeared to be reassessing their assumptions about humanity's place in galactic civilization. Crystal stood frozen, his forearms held in a combat position that he seemed to have forgotten how to complete. For 3,000 years, the Crithari had based their entire civilization on the principle that might made right, that the strongest species naturally deserved to rule. But this small bleeding human had just demonstrated something that didn't fit into that worldview. "You speak of stubbornness as if it were a virtue," Crystal said finally, his voice uncertain for the first time since Marcus had met him. "But what purpose does it serve? What is gained by refusing to accept reality?" Marcus managed a painful laugh, blood speckling his lips. "Maybe that's where we're different, big guy. You see reality as something that's fixed, something you have to accept. We see it as something you can change if you're willing to pay the price." "Change reality?" One of the plant-like Silathi representatives had left her seat and moved closer to the platform, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that indicated intense curiosity. "That is impossible." "Reality simply is it?" Marcus asked, directing his question not just to the Silathi but to the entire assembled crowd. 100 years ago, reality was that humans were stuck on one planet, fighting each other over scraps. 50 years ago, reality was that we'd never develop FTL technology fast enough to join galactic civilization. 10 years ago, reality was that we were too primitive to ever be accepted as equals in the coalition. He gestured around the amphitheater with one shaking hand. And 5 minutes ago, reality was that I was going to get beaten down by a superior opponent and prove that humans don't belong here. But I'm still standing, and I'm still fighting, and maybe reality isn't as fixed as everyone thinks. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus could see dozens of alien minds grappling with concepts that went against everything they had been taught about the way the universe worked. The idea that reality could be changed through will and determination was foreign to species that had evolved in stable, predictable environments where adaptation meant fitting into established niches. But humans had evolved differently. They had clawed their way up from the bottom of Earth's food chain through sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept their limitations. They had turned their weaknesses into strengths, their disadvantages into advantages, and their failures into stepping stones toward success. Ambassador Thexhi's skin had shifted through several color patterns that Marcus had learned indicated deep thought and calculation. Finally, the Xanthari diplomat spoke, his words carrying clearly through the amphitheater's perfect acoustics. War Leader Krixtal, he said formally, I believe this demonstration has served its purpose. Perhaps it would be wise to— No. The interruption came not from Marcus, but from Krixtal himself. The massive Krithari warrior was staring at the human with an expression that Marcus couldn't quite read. This lesson is not yet complete. Krixtal began to move in a slow circle around the platform, his amber eyes never leaving Marcus. I have fought in 1,000 battles across 100 worlds, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the amphitheater. I have faced enemies that breathed fire, others that could phase through solid matter, and creatures whose very presence could drive lesser minds to madness. I have always emerged victorious because I have always been stronger, faster, or more skilled than my opponents. He stopped directly in front of Marcus, close enough that the human could feel the heat radiating from the alien's armored skin. But you, small human, have shown me something I have never encountered before. You have shown me an enemy that cannot be defeated through conventional means. I'm not your enemy, Marcus said quietly, his voice hoarse from pain and exhaustion. Aren't you? Krixtal asked, tilting his massive head. You represent everything that challenges our understanding of the natural order. Your mere existence here in this moment, defying all logic and expectation, is a threat to every assumption upon which coalition civilization is built. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with his injuries. This had started as a simple sparring match, but it was becoming something much more dangerous. He could see it in the faces of the watching aliens, the fear, the uncertainty, the growing realization that they were witnessing something that could change everything. Look around you, Krixtal continued, gesturing toward the assembled representatives. Do you see the expressions on their faces? They came here expecting to watch a demonstration of Krithari superiority. Instead, they are watching their understanding of the universe crumble before their eyes. The Krithari warrior raised all 4 of his arms, and Marcus could see the massive muscles tensing beneath the natural armor. For the sake of stability, for the sake of order, for the sake of everything we have built over millennia of careful civilization, this demonstration must end the way it was always meant to end. Marcus understood. This wasn't about personal combat anymore. It was about maintaining the coalition's fundamental beliefs about strength, superiority, and the natural order of things. If word spread that a primitive human had stood toe-to-toe with a Krithari war leader and survived, it would raise questions that the coalition wasn't ready to answer. So that's it? Marcus asked, settling back into his fighting stance despite the agony it caused. You're going to kill me to preserve your way of thinking? I am going to restore order, Krixtal corrected. Nothing personal, human. You have fought with honor and courage, but some truths are too dangerous to be allowed to spread. Around the amphitheater, Marcus could see the other species beginning to understand what was happening. Some looked horrified, others resigned, but none seemed prepared to intervene. This was a Krithari matter now, and the Krithari had always been allowed to handle their own affairs. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, thinking about his little sister back on Earth, about the drill sergeants who had shaped him, About all the humans who would never know what had happened here. When he opened them again, his gaze was steady and unafraid. "You know what the funny thing is?" he said conversationally. "You're probably right. Maybe some truths are too dangerous. Maybe the universe really does work better when everyone knows their place and stays in it." Crixtal paused, surprised by the apparent capitulation. "But here's the thing about humans," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "We've never been good at knowing our place. We keep reaching for things we're not supposed to have, going places we're not supposed to go, and refusing to accept limits that other people try to put on us." He took a step forward, closing the distance between himself and the alien warrior. "So go ahead, do what you think you have to do. But understand this, killing me won't kill what I represent. It won't kill the idea that reality can be changed, and it sure as hell won't kill the human spirit that brought us this far." Marcus spread his arms wide, leaving himself completely open to attack. "You want to restore order? Then do it. But know that every human who ever hears this story will see it as proof that we belong here, not evidence that we don't." Crixtal's eyes widened as he realized the trap he had fallen into. By making this about preserving order, he had inadvertently created the very legend he was trying to prevent. Win or lose, Marcus Rodriguez had already become a symbol of human determination that no amount of violence could erase. For a long moment, the two warriors faced each other in silence, the weight of history pressing down upon them both. Then Crixtal began to laugh, a sound like grinding mountains that held no humor whatsoever. "Clever," he admitted. "Very clever. You have maneuvered me into a position where any action I take serves your purpose." "Not my purpose," Marcus corrected. "Truth's purpose. And truth has a way of getting out, no matter how hard you try to bury it." The standoff stretched for what felt like an eternity. Crixtal stood with his forearms raised, caught between his warrior's instincts and a growing understanding that this fight had become something far more complex than a simple demonstration of superiority. Marcus waited, bleeding and broken but still defiant, his eyes locked on the alien's amber gaze. It was Ambassador Thexhai who finally broke the silence. His color-shifting skin displaying patterns that Marcus had learned indicated urgent communication. "War Leader Crixtal, I must point out that we have observers." The Xanthari diplomat gestured toward the edges of the amphitheater, and for the first time, Marcus noticed the small recording devices that had been discreetly positioned throughout the arena. Dozens of them, representing different species and different news organizations throughout Coalition space. "This demonstration was always intended to be recorded," Thexhai continued, his skin now showing colors that definitely indicated distress. "The footage will be transmitted to every Coalition world within hours. The implications of what has transpired here will reach every corner of civilized space." Crixtal's amber eyes flicked toward the recording devices, then back to Marcus. The Crithari warrior's expression went through several rapid changes as he processed the full ramifications of the situation. What had started as a private lesson in humility had become a very public challenge to the fundamental order of galactic civilization. "You knew," Crixtal said suddenly, his voice carrying a mix of admiration and anger. "When you accepted my challenge, you knew this would be recorded. You deliberately walked into a situation where you couldn't possibly win, but where your defeat would serve a larger purpose." Marcus managed a weak smile. "Actually, I was just trying not to look like a coward in front of a bunch of aliens. The political ramifications didn't occur to me until about 5 minutes ago." The admission seemed to surprise Crixtal more than anything else that had happened during their fight. "You mean you didn't plan any of this? Your refusal to yield, your speeches about human determination, your manipulation of the situation, none of it was calculated?" "Not really," Marcus said, swaying slightly as exhaustion began to catch up with him. "I was just doing what Marines are taught to do. Never give up, never surrender, and always remember that your actions represent something bigger than yourself." Around the amphitheater, the assembled representatives were beginning to stir from their shocked silence. Marcus could hear fragments of urgent conversations in dozens of languages as the political implications of the fight began to sink in. This hadn't just been a demonstration of combat prowess. It had become a defining moment in human coalition relations. One of the mechanical Nixari approached the platform, its optical sensors focused on Marcus with what might have been curiosity. "Query. Human designation Rodriguez. What is your assessment of this encounter's significance for interspecies relations? Marcus looked around at the dozens of alien faces watching him, each representing civilizations that were older, more advanced, and more powerful than humanity. But in their expressions, he saw something he hadn't expected to see: uncertainty. For the first time in their long histories, these species were questioning their assumptions about strength, superiority, and the natural order of things. I think, Marcus said carefully, that maybe it's time for the galaxy to reconsider what strength really means. The statement sent ripples of conversation through the crowd. Several species began heated discussions about the implications of what they had witnessed, while others simply stared at Marcus with expressions ranging from fascination to fear. Crixtal slowly lowered his forearms, his combat stance dissolving into something approaching exhaustion. "You realize what you have done?" he asked quietly. For 3,000 years, the Coalition has maintained stability through clear hierarchies of power. The strong lead, the weak follow, and everyone knows their place. But you have introduced chaos into that order. Have I? Marcus asked. Or have I just shown that there are different kinds of strength than the ones you've been measuring? Before Crixtal could answer, a new voice joined the conversation. An interesting philosophical question, but one that will have to be addressed at much higher levels than this. Everyone turned to see a figure approaching the platform that made even Crixtal step back in surprise. The newcomer was clearly Coalition authority of the highest order, a being whose very presence seemed to command respect from every species in the amphitheater. It was a celestial, one of the energy-based entities that had guided Coalition policy for over 5 millennia. Their kind rarely intervened directly in local affairs, preferring to work through established governmental channels. The fact that one had appeared here now indicated that this incident had already reached the highest levels of Coalition command. The Celestial's form was difficult to look at directly, a constantly shifting pattern of light and energy that hurt human eyes to focus on. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I am High Arbiter Luminance of Truth," it announced. "I have been monitoring this encounter with great interest. War Leader Crixtal, you may stand down. This demonstration has concluded." Crixtal immediately adopted a posture that Marcus recognized as the Crithari equivalent of attention. "High Arbiter, I await your judgment on this irregularity." Irregularity. The Celestial's form pulsed with what might have been amusement. "My dear Crixtal, I believe you fundamentally misunderstand what we have witnessed here today." The energy being turned its attention to Marcus, who found himself fighting the urge to salute despite his injuries. "Sergeant Rodriguez of Earth's military forces, you have provided us with a most illuminating demonstration. Not of human combat ability, which as War Leader Crixtal correctly noted is inferior to most Coalition species, but of something far more valuable. Sir," Marcus managed, not sure if sir was the appropriate term of address for an energy being of cosmic significance. "You have demonstrated the one quality that has driven every major advancement in Coalition history," Luminance of Truth explained. "The refusal to accept limitations as permanent conditions. It was that quality that allowed the Zenthari to develop their color communication systems, that drove the Nexari to merge organic and synthetic technologies, and that enabled the Crithari to become the warriors they are today." The Celestial's form shifted to encompass both Marcus and Crixtal. But over time, success breeds complacency. The Crithari became convinced that their strength made them superior to all other forms of achievement. The Coalition as a whole began to view the natural order as something fixed and immutable. Marcus felt a chill of understanding as he realized what the Celestial was saying. This was a test. Not a test, Luminance of Truth corrected. A reminder. A demonstration that the universe still holds surprises for those humble enough to recognize them. Crixtal's amber eyes widened as the implications hit him. You allowed this to happen. You could have prevented it, but you chose not to intervene." "I chose to learn," the Celestial replied. "And what I learned is that humanity possesses something the Coalition desperately needs. The ability to see possibilities where others see only limitations. The willingness to attempt the impossible simply because no one has told them it can't be done." The High Arbiter's attention returned to Marcus, who was beginning to feel the full weight of his injuries now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "Your species will be granted full membership in the Coalition, Sergeant Rodriguez. not as junior partners or primitive additions, but as equals with full rights and responsibilities. Marcus felt his legs beginning to give out as the magnitude of what had just happened hit him. He had walked into a simple sparring match and somehow changed the course of human history. The irony wasn't lost on him that the most important victory of his life had come in a fight he had never had any chance of winning. 6 months after the fight that changed everything, Marcus Rodriguez stood in the observation deck of the Coalition's newest flagship, watching Earth grow larger in the viewport. His ribs had healed completely, though the scars remained as a permanent reminder of that day in the amphitheater. More importantly, the galaxy itself bore scars from the encounter, scars that were slowly healing into something stronger and more beautiful than what had come before. The ship around him was a testament to how much had changed. The Harmony's Hope was the first vessel designed through true Coalition cooperation, combining Krathari engineering, Xanthari material science, Nexari computing systems, and human innovation in ways that none of the species could have achieved alone. The result was something that exceeded the sum of its parts, much like the Coalition itself was learning to do. "Impressive view," came a familiar voice from behind him. Marcus turned to see Crixtal approaching, the massive Krathari moving with his characteristic fluid grace. The alien warrior had requested assignment to the ship's security detail, claiming he needed to better understand the species that had challenged everything he thought he knew about strength. "It never gets old," Marcus agreed, gesturing toward the blue-green marble that was humanity's homeworld. "No matter how far you travel or how many alien worlds you see, there's something special about coming home." Crixtal moved to stand beside him at the viewport, his forearms clasped behind his back in a posture that had become his preferred stance for deep conversation. "I have been studying human history during our voyage," he said. "Your species has a remarkable talent for turning disadvantages into advantages." "How so?" "Your physical limitations forced you to develop technology. Your short lifespans encouraged rapid innovation. Your tendency toward conflict drove you to develop increasingly sophisticated strategies and tactics." Crixtal's amber eyes reflected the light from Earth's surface. "Even your stubborn refusal to accept defeat, which I initially saw as a character flaw, has proven to be your greatest strength." Marcus smiled at the admission. Over the past months, he had watched his former opponent undergo a transformation that was as dramatic as anything that had happened to the Coalition itself. Crixtal had begun questioning assumptions that his people had held for millennia, challenging the rigid hierarchies that had defined Krathari society for generations. "You know what I've learned?" Marcus said. "Every species in the Coalition has something unique to offer, but we all got so focused on ranking ourselves against each other that we forgot about cooperation. Humans aren't better than Krathari, and Krathari aren't better than humans. We're just different, and that difference makes us stronger when we work together." The observation deck's main entrance slid open, and Ambassador Thexhai entered, his skin displaying the warm golden patterns that Marcus had learned indicated contentment. The Xanthari diplomat had become something of a friend over the past months, helping Marcus navigate the complex political implications of his newfound fame. "Sergeant Rodriguez." "War Leader Crixtal," Thexhai said formally, then shifted to the more casual tone he used in private. "Are you ready for the ceremony tomorrow?" Marcus grimaced. The ceremony in question would formally recognize his role in humanity's elevation to full Coalition membership, complete with speeches, media coverage, and what promised to be an uncomfortable amount of attention. "As ready as I'll ever be, though I still think this is all being blown out of proportion." Crixtal's laugh, a sound that had become less harsh and more genuinely amused over the months, echoed through the observation deck. "Marcus, you single-handedly changed the fundamental philosophy of a galactic civilization. I think a ceremony is the least they can do." "I didn't change anything," Marcus protested. "I just did what Marines are trained to do. Everything else was, I don't know, chance or fate or something." "Was it?" Thexhai asked, his skin shifting to colors that indicated philosophical contemplation. "I have spoken with High Arbiter Luminance of Truth many times since that day. The Celestials had been watching humanity for decades, waiting for the right moment to fully integrate your species into the Coalition. Your fight with Crixtal simply provided the perfect catalyst." "You mean they were manipulating events?" Marcus asked, feeling a familiar surge of irritation at the idea of being used as someone else's tool. "Not manipulating," Thexhai corrected. "Waiting. The Celestials learned long ago that forced change rarely lasts. Real transformation has to come from within, from genuine conviction and authentic choice. They could have granted humanity full membership at any time, but it wouldn't have meant anything without the respect of the other coalition species. Crixtal nodded agreement. Your refusal to surrender forced all of us to confront our assumptions about strength and superiority. The Vorthen have begun incorporating human persistence training into their educational systems. The Salathi are studying human adaptability to improve their own survival strategies. Even the Nexari are interested in what they call organic irrationality as a component of their decision-making processes. The thought was both humbling and terrifying. Marcus had never intended to become a symbol or a catalyst for change. He had simply been trying to avoid embarrassing his species in front of the galaxy's elite. The fact that his stubborn refusal to quit had triggered a philosophical revolution was still difficult for him to accept. The funny thing is, Marcus said, I almost yielded about 6 different times during that fight. If Crixtal had offered me an honorable way out, I probably would have taken it. But I didn't, Crixtal reminded him. I was so convinced of my own superiority that I couldn't conceive of a scenario where offering you mercy would be necessary. My arrogance became the foundation of your victory. And now? The Crithari warrior was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the growing image of Earth. Now I understand that true strength isn't about dominating others. It's about lifting them up, helping them become stronger than they thought possible. The coalition is stronger because humanity joined it, not in spite of that fact. An alert chimed through the ship's communication system, announcing their approach to Earth's orbital traffic control zone. Soon they would be docking with the massive space station that had become humanity's primary interface with coalition civilization. Marcus would be reunited with his family, his fellow Marines, and a world that had been transformed by his single act of stubborn defiance. Any regrets? Thexai asked as they prepared to leave the observation deck. Marcus considered the question seriously. His life had been turned upside down by fame he had never wanted. He could never again be the anonymous staff sergeant who simply followed orders and minded his own business. Every decision he made now carried political implications. Every word he spoke was analyzed for deeper meaning. But he also knew that humanity now had a voice in galactic affairs, that his sister would grow up in a universe where humans were respected equals, rather than junior partners. The coalition itself was becoming something better, something more inclusive and adaptable than it had been before. No, he said finally, no regrets. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just keep fighting, even when you can't see how you're going to win. Crixtal placed one of his massive hands on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture of friendship that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. That, my friend, is perhaps the most human thing you have ever said. As they walked toward the docking bay where shuttles waited to carry them down to Earth's surface, Marcus reflected on the strange path that had brought him here. He had started as a simple soldier following orders, and somehow become a symbol of humanity's place in the galaxy. The irony wasn't lost on him that his greatest victory had come not through winning, but through refusing to lose. In a universe filled with species that were stronger, faster, and more advanced than humanity, that might just be enough. After all, humans had always been good at making the impossible look easy. They just had to be stubborn enough to keep trying until they figured out how. The shuttle bay doors opened ahead of them, revealing Earth's blue skies beyond. Marcus Rodriguez, the Marine who had changed the galaxy by refusing to know when he was beaten, stepped forward to face whatever came next. He was ready for the fight.